Now, I wonder how many of you have heard of the podcast Outrage and Optimism?
Hey!
Okay, so I would describe that as a good opportunity to introduce you to what we're doing. Outrage and Optimism is a podcast that Paul and I have been running for 5 years with our good friend Christiana Figueres, who sadly isn't here today.
What?
No Christiana, Paul. We're going to have to just be you and me together with our brilliant guests. But we are recording a live episode, so we're going to kick off and get moving. And I think all of you know the context of this discussion. This is the best of times and the worst of times. We have made enormous progress on the economics and on the technology that underpins this transition. But the political dividend that we need to deliver to ensure we have the consistent support from governments and others to keep moving forward has not happened. We have not brought people with us thus far like we're going to need to do in this transition in order to keep moving forward. So with that, let's begin the discussion. So please welcome Lindsay, Levin, Paul Dickenson, and Sweta Chakraborty. So I would like to kick off by challenging you all to give a short 90-second answer to a question that I'm going to pose to you. When you look at where we are right now, what strikes you most and what surprises you most about the climate landscape in 2025? Lindsay, let's start with you.
Well, thank you, Tom, and it's great to be here. I think to state the obvious, we're really in a different era, and grasping that it is a different era. That so much of what's gone before is not relevant anymore, or is less relevant than it was, is a huge part of getting to grips with what's happened in the States. Despite my accent, I'm an American citizen as well as a British citizen, so I live in the US, and I'm kind of dealing with the ramifications of everything that's happened there. So from a geopolitical point of view, from a trade point of view, and yes, from a climate point of view, we're in a different era. That's the first thing that I would say. And the second thing I would say is that climate needs to be part of everything else, not apart from everything else. And that realization that actually we need to paint a picture and have a story and have a vision that includes jobs, livelihoods, work, society, how does life look, how does life feel for people, as opposed to a climate campaign that's separate from everything else. And I think that's part of what's got us into this moment. In terms of surprise, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but I think we're going to see people standing up with moral courage in ways, and we're just beginning to see the first pieces of that, and I think there's a lot of promise there.
Okay, I like that. We'll come back to that. Paul?
Tough topic. On the optimism side,
yes,
we've got 2.1 trillion that went into the energy transition last year, according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance. 10 times more than Goldman say will go into AI in this year. So we're already, a gigantic industry. We can't kid ourselves that the USA has done this crazy thing, pulled out of Paris. Australia's done similar things before. But now Australia,
as has the US,
but Australia now has a commitment to net zero by 2050 that's accepted by both parties, Climate Change Committee and all the rest of it. The thing now is the US has gone off the deep end, and there's an inability to debate climate anymore. The fossil fuel interest, and I'm thinking particularly about coal barons in the USA and all the rest of it. They are no longer willing to debate the topic. They see the only way forward is to end public debate, either through intimidation or other kinds of unprecedented interventions. And that's the story of 2025.
All right.
Okay, well, I guess I have to pick up on that. That's what makes the most sense. But before I do that, firstly, it's a pleasure to be back on the podcast. And it's a pleasure to be back on this stage. I was here last year. But I should not be here right now. I should be in the Kamala Harris administration. I served as a surrogate for her as she was running for office. And I'm not in the White House. I'm not supporting climate policy and a transition to clean energy, picking up the mantle from what the Biden administration did. And that is so telling of where the United States is. It has been devastating to witness this on a personal level, being excited about the first female president, the first Indian, first black woman president of the United States. That's devastating. It's devastating professionally in terms of where climate action was moving as a leader in the global stage. And it's devastating as a witness to seeing how extremely opposite what's happening now to what we anticipated would have been happening now. And this dismantling of democracy in front of our faces is just, that's the state of affairs, and that's exactly what Paul just said. And we have to recognize that this was really a mess up on the side of the US. There's no two ways around this. I just came from the Change Now conference in Paris, and the rumor mill around the Americans that were present there, including myself, is that we're all freaking out. And we are freaking out. I'm freaking out. This has been so far from not just what American ideals are and where we need to be going, but the reality of the science and what we need to be doing right now to ensure we don't usher in runaway climate change. So it's really there's not a lot of cause for optimism in the United States, but coming out, as we were talking about, Lindsay, coming out and seeing that the global transition is still underway, that there's still an acceleration and excitement around a movement towards a future that is more breathable, more equitable, and that really runs on clean energy, for me, that is what I'm most excited about currently.
Love that. And we're also sad you're not in the White House, so, but glad you're here with us today. Sweta, just to stay with you for a minute, I had what I felt was quite a chilling experience last week. I was at the Time 100 Summit in New York, and all the speakers are the kinds of people you would think, like big Hollywood stars, celebrities, CEOs, and they all implied that they didn't agree with what was happening in the US, but none of them would say it. They would all say, well, I won't actually put a target on my back, and I've never seen that. I mean, that's the kind of thing you're used to hearing in China, in maybe in India, but in the US, that is a new experience, and it really chilled me to the bone, I have to say. I just want to, I mean, you're a behavioural scientist amongst many other things, including a podcaster. How are citizens and markets responding to this change in climate leadership, but in leadership more broadly? What are you seeing there?
No, great point.
Yeah.
And I am normally very measured as a scientist, and I'm still measured, but by my standards, I'm speaking out in a way that is unexpected. And so now I can just straight talk, because especially after Change Now last week, that ship has sailed. If there's a target on my back, it's definitely, they know, I'm on the radar. But we don't have the luxury of that. We're Americans. Since when can Americans not speak truth to power? That's the whole essence of being American, an American democracy. Think what you will of it, but that is the very core of who we say we are. And so I am not going to be intimidated to do the very core democratic American action, which is to speak out against what is so obviously wrong here, what is so obviously regressive to what we need to be doing. And behaviorally, from a behavioral science point of view, people are scared. Why wouldn't they be? This is a vindictive man. This leader and clown in the White House is extremely, and this is what I mean about being off the measured path, but that's what it is. That's what's happening, and it's working. But then I was just with, on my podcast, I was just interviewing Gina McCarthy. She was the chief administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States, and very much a climate spokesperson from the Biden administration, and she's speaking out, but she doesn't care, and she wishes that more of those who have been elected into power follow that same path, and we are building a resistance. I want everyone here to please not give up on the United States and to recognize that there is work happening. It seems like nothing's happening. We're in a bit of a stealth mode, but we are going to come out in force, because this is absolutely unacceptable.
I think, just to add to that, I think it's taken a while, because it is an overwhelm. There's so much going on for people to figure out how to respond. And there has also been a need to take stock of what's gone wrong, as opposed to just be super impulsive. So what I'm noticing is, as the first few people are starting to find their voice and speak, I mean, Harvard, most powerful university in the world, but people were so relieved when Harvard stood up, and now there's a group of universities coming together and realizing we can't be picked off. We need to act together. The same with the law firms, where they just capitulated in a terrible way and probably are feeling pretty ashamed of themselves. If they'd have got together, they could have avoided that. So there's something about how you organize that people are still finding their feet.
And I want to ask you about what you're learning, particularly with TED Countdown, the momentum you're seeing there. But just very quickly, Sweta, it's very easy for someone like me to think, once the cracks start to appear in something like what's happening in the US, we then may see real momentum towards the resistance. And just very briefly, from a behavioral science point of view, is that accurate? Can you see some of that stuff emerging now?
it's part of the authoritarian playbook to actually create a resistance that can then be manipulated into being called an insurrection. And this is something that we have to be very careful and smart about. And it seems impossible that something like that would happen in the United States, but everything that's happened in the last 100 days, the beginning of the Trump presidency, seems completely insane and impossible. So we are working with publics, communities, local leaders to ensure that we do this evidence-based and behavioral outcomes are actually entrenched in science, so that ultimately the resistance behaves in a way that brings about a fair next election and doesn't result in what could be one potential outcome that nobody wants to see become reality.
Thank you. Okay. Lindsay, you, amongst many other things, have founded the climate initiative that sits inside TED, that everyone will be familiar with, TED Countdown, the global climate platform. And I mean, what I've seen there over the last few years is you've created some of the content that has cut through the most emotionally, intellectually. What have you learned about what works?
I mean, the first thing I'd say is that different people respond to different things. And, you know, many of us in this room may be motivated about climate because we are seriously worried and fearful about the future, because we are driven by facts and science and so forth. And that works for a chunk of people. But there's another chunk of people who, if you keep bashing them over the head with all of that, it really doesn't work. It turns them off, it polarizes people. So I think one of the things we've understood is that we need to communicate in different ways with different people, and that you need to do that through people that they trust. So who do you trust? You know, when we're making TED Talks on climate solutions, we're really giving wings to important ideas. The fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, such a hard one to say, was an example of that, where we take an idea and it reaches a certain audience, but different audiences need different kinds of solutions, and they need to tap into people that they trust. So another dimension of the learning for us now is that we're working a lot with creators who've got big followings. They may not be in the sustainability space. They may be a brilliant chef, or they may be a mom who's got a big following, or a farmer, you know, from Iowa or something, who's built a following. And we're working with them around people who are curious and interested, and they want to be part of the future, and they want to be part of a sustainable world. They're not a scientist. They want to learn and understand the facts, and then understand how to communicate to their community. So not one size fits all. People do not want to be preached to. We are unfortunately guilty of that as a movement, if you could call us that. And the other thing I'd say is, when Trump was first elected, I was already living in the States, and one of my responses was I went off to West Virginia and I started to meet with people who'd voted for him en masse. And that was an incredibly humbling experience. I mean, to be blunt, by the time I even got to the place I was going, I thought, well, if I lived here, I sure as hell wouldn't have voted for the Democrats. So there's a big piece about engaging and listening, and of course that's a global story, and recognizing that, you know, if we tap into asking people what's important in their lives, and then engage at that level, and find ways for people to be more hands-on. That's how you actually change, by doing something and taking action, not by it just kind of going in through the head. So we're trying to give opportunities for those sort of stories to come to life, and for people to reach their different audiences.
And how, I mean, it's so interesting to take the different approach and look at other creators, which of course have so much influence in our world now, like chefs or beauty creators or whatever it might be that you're using. Are you finding that they are able to integrate climate into their work without precipitating a pushback? Because there's such a culture war now going on.
It's a great question.
How do
I mean, we actually have to support them when they get the pushback.
Okay.
So, you know, one of the things is not being from the climate space and saying to people who are brilliant communicators in their own right, this is the message you should tell, because they know the message. They know how to speak to their audience. Us telling them, you know, what the message is a mistake. So then you let them speak about things in way. I mean, I'll give you an example. A builder showing his electric power tools and how brilliant these power tools are. A farmer talking about what he's now doing in farming practice. A chef showing, you know, vegetarian foods and so forth, and how they're doing that. Now, when people talk electric vehicles, huge trigger. We've had creators who've spoken about electric vehicles, and they get bombarded with incredibly nasty, you know, death threats and all the rest of it. And there, what we've needed to do is to be with them to respond. So help them when they get the first flush of social media
will
traffic,
come. Yeah.
which comes
Yeah.
in, this is how you respond. So the place for the experts is often in supporting the communicators, not telling them how to reach their audiences and engage people.
Great. Paul, this is great. This is a change. We're normally co-hosts together, so I'm enjoying this.
As a guest, I've been on Outrage Optimism a lot.
You have, yeah. So, I mean, Paul, you and I spend a lot of time talking about these issues, and one of the things that I have learned from you, I mean, you've been involved in the business response to climate for more than 20 years, and you, I think I'm right in saying, over that time, you have really come to see the absence of the business voice pushing for science-based policy, and in fact, often doing the opposite, is one of the backdrops to this geopolitical democratic problem that we are in. So set out for us a little bit why we're still there, because it feels like we were talking about that 20 years ago, and have we made progress on business actually pushing governments for real policy solutions, or are they still obstructing?
Yeah, I mean,
and just bear in mind, you have a whole group of people in here who should be lobbying in favour of the positive.
friends, Romans, countrymen. Look, the thing that I think is most interesting is people have completely failed to appreciate how significant business is as a cultural, and I'm going to call it a political force, but political with a small p, not big P politics about transgender bathrooms in Texas or Xi Jinping getting a third term or a fourth term. I'm talking about small politics, consensus politics around science. You know, it's true that business has been intimidated by states attorneys general, for example, in the US, have started kind of weaponizing some aspects of government, and business is naturally nervous about that. But citizens and business can stand behind, in the US, things like the US Constitution, and say, you know, we uphold the Constitution with all of its rights that are so critical to American democracy. Thinking more broadly, in the very long time I've had the privilege to work on climate change, particularly with business and investors, there's been an evolution. You know, you've had disclosure of data on climate change, it's led to science-based targets, companies are now talking about transition plans. But I want to really draw your attention to the fact that to get to net zero, we're now going to need to get into a partnership with governments and civil servants, investors, corporations, and governments developing policy and regulation that makes decarbonization profitable, because climate finance is really just normal finance. If we can make the business opportunities profitable, then we'll decarbonize. And I mean, you know, people say, well, you know, renewable energy is expensive. You know, gas is expensive. In 23, the UK spent 38 billion buying gas from Norway. That's a lot of money. People say electric vehicles are expensive. Oil's expensive. So there is some upfront investment, but if government is a partner, net zero is in fact a kind of gold rush. And people say, oh, you know, we can't afford this and we can't afford that. The sheer value creation behind sort of Tesla or BYD, think of the hundreds of billions, and let us reframe this brilliant conference about money and value creation, jobs, and a safe and secure future.
Awesome, great, thank you. So I'm going to invite some questions in a minute, so get your questions ready, and then you can put your hand up. I want to ask one more quick round for all of you to answer, which is, what communications mistake do you think we are likely to make but must avoid making in the next year, now that we're in this situation? Think about how the climate movement generally, what do we need to ensure we don't do as we communicate the next phase of climate action? Sweta, let's start with you.
We have learned so much from the outcome of this election, so there's definitely mistakes that were made that I'll address in 1 second, but just to underscore everything Lindsay said, trust is everything. How trusted the spokesperson is that's communicating to the audience will determine their behavioral outcome. And ensuring that those partnerships are created, like you're doing with TED, which is incredible, but also creating spokespeople within the climate community, truly building them up. So if there isn't a willingness of an influencer, celebrity, chef, whoever it might be, to talk about climate, there's still a community within the climate community. And we don't have that. We have incredible spokespeople that we all know because we're in our community bubble, but those spokespeople haven't translated to wider audiences. I'm talking about like a Katharine Hayhoe, for example, who, if you go to Americans and ask them to name a scientist, they'll name Neil deGrasse Tyson or Bill Nye. And if you ask for a woman scientist, they'll scratch their heads and they may say Jane Goodall if we're lucky. So there's a long way to go to build up those those spokespeople within our community who are brilliant themselves and that can really be advocates as we go forward into the future. So that's a critical component of this. A big learning coming out of this election failure from the Democrats was that we're asking for, let's say, $100 million. That is a drop in the bucket. It seems like a lot, especially for those on the side of science, to get their message out. The other side, the extreme right conservative worldview that has been created for decades, and $100 billion has been put into education from K to 12, has been put into media, has been put into politics. The amount of money that went into politics is, in this most recent election where Trump won, is nothing compared to the decades of billions of dollars that has been amounting to this most recent election outcome. Trump is just a byproduct of all of that. So we are racing to catch up. So a major learning coming out of this election is, yes, we need the resources, we need the spokespeople, and we need to actually speed up and collaborate in a way to make up for how many decades ahead the extreme right side is in the United States and around the world. So big learning, and I hope going forward, is true collaboration, not just talking about it like we like to do, but genuinely looking at the big picture, because the right definitely has looked at the big picture. That worldview, this nostalgic manufacturing fantasy of an America long gone that will never happen, it's a collective, collaborative effort to push that worldview forward. Where is our secular, equitable worldview to attract the masses? That's what we need to do.
Great, thank you. Paul?
I agree with all of that. You know, you've got to have a dream or you can't have a dream come true. I think that the thing that I find amusing is in a way, I think of Ursula von der Leyen as a sort of symbol of the EU struggling kind of with the Green Deal, but kind of a bit excited about it, then desperately worried about the Inflation Reduction Act taking away Europe's leadership, then desperately worried about the Trump administration coming in. And like, could we just sort of practice a little bit of leadership ourselves? You know, I don't think it's a problem that China has come to use its industrial policy to make solar and electric vehicles very cheap. I think we shouldn't be afraid to buy them and learn from their leadership. No one criticizes China for its leadership on renewable energy or electric vehicles. Let's learn that lesson and think about the grids where Europe does lead, which is complicated, selling to state-owned enterprises. We have the technologies. We're going to lay the internet over the energy infrastructure of the world. I would like to see Europe and the UK as a confident, free energy superpower leading the free energy world.
Yeah, I would really endorse that. I mean, seeing this as global, the US isn't the center of the world, despite, you know, our often seeing ourselves that way. And leadership is coming already exists in many different places and in many different ways and many different forms. You know, I'm just getting ready to do a summit in Nairobi in a couple of months' time. We have incredible Chinese speakers to speak to China, incredible people building amazing businesses, very values-driven, you know, really sharing what they're doing and how they're doing it and doing it at scale. There's incredible leadership in Africa. There's incredible entrepreneurship. There's a youth. You know, it's a very young population contrary to what we've got here. And so, being fixated on the immediate drama, as opposed to recognizing that change is afoot. In many ways, we've got change happening exponentially. We need lots more of it. Leadership comes from many different places, many different voices. And in some ways, in the kind of US catastrophe that we're dealing with, well, it's making room for others. And people are finding, you know, do they have the mettle? And how is Europe going to stand up? And how are other countries going to stand up? And I think there's tremendous promise in that. And we may look back on this not only as a time of tremendous turmoil, but perhaps there's going to be some positive turning points in this too.
Absolutely. Okay, so 2 questions is all we've got time for. One over here, and then another one.
Thank you so much. My name is Dr. Stanislav Edward-Shmelev. I'm the founder of Environment Europe Foundation in The Hague. My question to most panelists. We have just published 3 amazing peer-reviewed papers on business sustainability and smart and sustainable cities. What would be your advice on how to make this very complex, hardcore and sciencey stuff more appealing and, you know, reachable for a wider community? Thank you.
That's a great question, how to make science more communicatable. Let's take one more question, and then we can ask them if there is another one. Over here.
My question's to all of you. I'm Anna from Greenhouse Communications. Sweta, I love what you were saying about we need a vision for the future and we need radical collaboration to have that vision and execute it. The right are doing a brilliant job at it. We're way behind. My question is, how do we do that? We know we need it. Who's doing that? And we have the COP process that's failing us. So what is your view on how we communicate that vision, but also how we actually drive action through the processes that we've already got? Thank you.
Great. Two fantastic questions. Lindsay, do you want to, well, whoever wants to start.
Yeah. I mean, I think in a way to both, we need to see this much more holistically. Mm-hmm. What is the world that we're building? What are the jobs that people will do? What is the role of science in the mix? Climate, I'm almost frightened when we think of climate communications as opposed to wider communications. I think this vision piece, part of the struggle, to counter Trump, to sort of go back to the US thing, but I think there's similar issues here, is what is the kind of liberal vision of the future? And we're struggling to have political leadership for that. So I think there's something about the real work of how we build a vision of the world that we want, which includes sustainability, includes the other things that people care about and that matter to people. And setting that out and then setting out a pathway to do that with Carney's election, very much a reaction to what's happened, south of the border, but hearing a leader there where people are turning and saying, well, right at this moment, we need somebody who's economically competent. And so there's different roles to be played by different parts of the system, and creating that wider coalition, if you like, and thinking together to build a broad movement towards the sort of future we want. I think there's a lot of work to be done on that. I also think it's exciting.
I couldn't be happier, honestly, in my whole life than to be here now with you. I asked Tim, who's organizing this conference, what's the vision of this conference? He says, to connect policy, business, funding, and innovation. And I think the vision of this conference is the answer to both of your excellent questions. And I think we're doing it right here, right now.
So this is it, right? What is the world view, as you were saying, Lindsay? What are we actually trying to get to, and how do we work backwards from that? Ultimately, there is work underway. It's happening in the United States. It'll be public soon enough. And it's to really counter that extreme right worldview in the US and globally. And the idea is that if we actually have science as the North Star in the United States and around the world, and we, in every decision we're making in private sector, in public sector, is truly evidence-based, science-based, then we are going to usher in a future that really is, if we actually, it sounds so simple, right, obviously, but let's actually move forward in private and public sectors based in science and not in fantasy, which is what this extreme right is touting. It's a return to a nostalgic past that will never exist again. It's women taking on traditional gender roles. We have, as a world, progressed past this, and we need to get those that aren't excited about it onto this future that is more equitable, more just, more breathable, where women are excited about having kids again because they don't have to worry how long their children are outside in the playground. That's something I'm very concerned about as a future mom, is do I have to worry about if my child has been in the heat for too long? Is there a sunstroke coming for them? If we can follow the science and usher in a future that we can really get women of childbearing age excited about, achieve global gender parity, and ultimately lead with science and create this worldview that is attractive to all, then that is something to really be fighting for and to be working towards.
It is both inspiring and a little demoralizing that we're here talking about following the science, but I absolutely love the message that you're putting out there. I mean, follow the science, we have the signals, don't give up hope, the resistance is coming. Count on us for your legal defense fund if you need it when you get home. But thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, the brilliant panelists, and we'll welcome the next stage.
Thank you. Yeah.